There's a moment many people don't talk about. Not the argument, not the breakup, but the silence that comes after you stop trying. You stop explaining yourself. You stop replying instantly. You stop bending just to keep the peace. And suddenly, people begin to ignore you. Messages go unanswered. Energy fades. Access is quietly taken away. At first, it feels personal, like rejection, like you did something wrong. But here's the uncomfortable truth most people never consider. You weren't ignored because you lost value. You were ignored because you became harder to control. Some relationships don't survive independence. They only exist when you're predictable, always available, and emotionally accessible on demand. Stoic philosophy teaches something unsettling here. What disturbs you isn't being ignored. It's misunderstanding why it's happening. Silence often appears the moment you reclaim your boundaries. Chasing clarity usually makes it worse. A Stoic responds without anger, without explanation, and without losing dignity, because when control disappears, truth is revealed. 1. Control is the hidden currency in relationships. Most people believe relationships are built on affection, loyalty, or shared history. But beneath the surface, many run on something less visible: control. Control doesn't always look aggressive. It doesn't require threats, anger, or dominance. More often, it hides behind familiarity. It looks like expecting instant replies, assuming emotional access whenever they want it, relying on your predictability, counting on your need to maintain harmony. As long as you respond, explain, reassure, and adjust yourself, the system works. Not because there's deep connection, but because the exchange is stable. Your availability becomes currency. Your emotional reactions become leverage. Your willingness to comply becomes comfort. Here's what most people miss. Many relationships don't ask, "How are you?" They ask, "Are you still controllable?" The moment that answer changes, everything shifts. When you stop reacting immediately, stop over-explaining, stop smoothing things over to avoid tension, the unspoken agreement breaks. People feel it instinctively, not consciously, not logically, but deeply. Stoic philosophy understands this. Human beings attach themselves to what they can predict and influence. When that influence weakens, discomfort follows. That discomfort doesn't always turn into conversation. More often, it turns into distance, silence, withdrawal, ignoring. Not because you offended them, but because the dynamic no longer benefits them. This is why being ignored often follows personal growth. You set a boundary, you become calmer, you respond less emotionally, you stop chasing validation. From your side, it feels like maturity. From theirs, it feels like loss of control. Loss of control triggers two reactions: attempts to pull you back or quiet disengagement. Ignoring you is often the second option. It isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's protection of their comfort, their ego, or their influence. Stoicism makes a clear distinction here. Connection and control are not the same. Someone can be close to you without needing power over you. But if closeness vanishes the moment you stop complying, then closeness was never the foundation. Control was. That's why chasing explanations after being ignored almost always backfires. When you chase, you restore the old order. You prove the silence worked. You show that distance still controls your behavior. And in doing so, you confirm exactly what was being tested. The Stoic response begins with clarity, not anger. Not everyone who ignores you is cruel, but everyone who ignores you is reacting to a change in access. Your role isn't to force connection back into place. Your role is to recognize when a relationship only survives through submission. Once you see that control was the currency, being ignored stops feeling like rejection. It starts looking like a signal. 2. Why silence makes people uncomfortable. silence is rarely neutral. When you stop explaining yourself, stop reacting, stop filling space with reassurance, something subtle but powerful happens. People lose their reference point. Most interaction relies on feedback, tone, speed, emotion, response. When that feedback disappears, the mind becomes uneasy. Not because silence is rude, but because it removes predictability. Predictability creates security. When people know how you'll respond, they know where they stand. When they don't, control weakens. That's why silence feels threatening internally. Without your reactions, people can't tell if they still matter, if they still influence you, if their presence still has power. For many, that uncertainty is intolerable. Stoic philosophy understood this long before modern psychology. People are disturbed not by events, but by their judgments of them. Silence forces judgment inward. When you speak less, others are left with their own interpretations, assumptions, and insecurities. Some respond with curiosity, others respond with distance. Distance feels safer than self-examination. This is why silence often leads to being ignored, not because you disappeared, but because you stopped managing their emotional state. You stopped smoothing confusion. You stopped offering reassurance on demand. You stopped making yourself easy to read. Unreadable people are difficult to control. In many relationships, your role was never just to exist. It was to respond, react, and confirm expectations. Silence breaks that role. It removes the emotional mirror others relied on to regulate themselves. For someone used to influence, silence feels like resistance, even when no resistance was intended. So instead of asking questions, instead of adjusting, they withdraw. Ignoring becomes a way to restore comfort because engagement would require facing uncertainty. Stoicism doesn't ask you to use silence as a weapon. It asks you to understand its effect. Silence reveals who respected your presence and who depended on your predictability. Those who valued connection adapt. Those who valued control disengage. This is where many people make a critical mistake. They confuse discomfort with hostility. They confuse withdrawal with rejection. But often being ignored is simply a response to lost leverage. You didn't provoke it. You didn't cause harm. You changed the conditions. And when the conditions changed, the dynamic exposed itself. Silence didn't end the relationship. It revealed what was holding it together. In the next part, you'll see why being ignored is often not a final decision, but a test designed to see whether you'll return to your old position. 3. Being ignored is often a test. When someone starts ignoring you, it's easy to assume the decision is final, that they've moved on, that they no longer care. But in many cases, ignoring isn't an ending. It's a test. A test to see whether distance still controls your behavior. Human beings learn patterns quickly. If withdrawing attention once made you chase, explain, apologize, or overextend, the mind remembers. So when you change, when you stop reacting the way you used to, the system checks whether the old buttons still work. Ignoring becomes a pressure tactic, not always conscious, not always malicious, but deliberate enough to provoke a response. The silence is meant to create discomfort. That discomfort is meant to pull you back into motion, to make you ask, did I do something wrong? Should I reach out? Should I explain myself? And the moment you do, the test is answered. You've confirmed that distance still has power over you. This is why being ignored often happens right after you assert a boundary, stop overgiving, or stop being emotionally available on demand. From the outside, nothing dramatic happened, but internally, the balance shifted, so the dynamic probes for weakness. If you rush to restore contact, the message is clear. The old structure still works. If you hold your position calmly, something else happens. The test fails. When a test fails, people are forced to reassess. Some will re-engage with respect. Others will disengage permanently. Both outcomes reveal the truth. Stoic philosophy teaches that external behavior is not under your control, but your response is. The mistake is trying to pass the test by proving worth. That was never the goal. The goal was to see whether you would abandon yourself to regain access, explaining yourself, over-apologizing, sending follow-ups, lowering standards just to re-enter the dynamic. Each of these actions teaches the other person that silence still governs you. Stoicism rejects this, not through aggression or coldness, but through non-participation. You don't confront the test, you don't announce your strength, you simply don't react. That restraint removes the incentive to manipulate. Manipulation only works when it produces movement. Without movement, the tactic collapses. This is why ignoring someone who no longer chases often loses its purpose. The silence becomes empty, and empty silence forces a decision: engage honestly or walk away. Either way, clarity returns. Being ignored stops feeling like a threat when you recognize it for what it is. Not judgment, not punishment, but a question asked without words. And the Stoic answer is never spoken. It's demonstrated by staying grounded, by staying dignified, by refusing to trade self-respect for attention. In the next part, you'll understand why explaining yourself at this stage doesn't fix the situation, and why it often quietly places you back into the very position you worked to leave. 4. Why explaining yourself lowers your position. The instinct to explain yourself is powerful, especially when silence feels unfair. You want to clarify, to be understood, to correct the narrative before it hardens. But this instinct often works against you because explanation changes the structure of the interaction. When you explain yourself to someone who has chosen to ignore you, you are no longer speaking as an equal. You are responding from a lower position. Explanation implies permission. It says, you get to judge whether my reasons are valid. You get to decide if my behavior deserves approval. You get access to my inner world on demand. Once that permission is given, the dynamic shifts again. Not toward understanding, but toward hierarchy. In healthy relationships, explanation flows naturally in both directions. There is curiosity, dialogue, mutual regard. But when one person withdraws communication and the other rushes to explain, curiosity disappears. Only leverage remains. Stoic philosophy warns against this quietly but firmly, not because explanation is weakness, but because timing matters. Explaining yourself while being ignored does not restore respect. It often signals dependence. It teaches the other person that silence works, that distance pulls you into self-justification. Once that lesson is learned, it's rarely unlearned. This is why explanations given under pressure tend to multiply. One message becomes two become paragraphs. Paragraphs turn into apologies for things that never required one. Each explanation deepens the same hole, not because you were wrong, but because you accepted the premise that you owed one. The Stoic approach is different. It doesn't deny explanation forever. It simply refuses to offer it when it would cost dignity. Marcus Aurelius captured this without drama. Do not waste time arguing what a good person should be. Be one. The same applies here. If your actions align with your values, if your boundaries were set calmly, if your silence is clarity rather than cruelty, explanation becomes unnecessary. Those who respect you will ask. Those who don't will judge regardless. Explaining yourself to someone who chose silence rarely changes their judgment. It only confirms their position. This is why restraint feels uncomfortable but powerful. You are not withholding information. You are refusing to negotiate your self-respect. You're saying without words, "My inner world is not available under pressure." That message, unlike an explanation, cannot be debated. It stands. In this part, you'll see how Stoicism reframes response entirely, not by reacting with less emotion, but by withdrawing energy without withdrawing humanity. 5. Withdraw energy, not emotion. When people hear the Stoic response to being ignored, they often misunderstand it. They imagine coldness, detachment, emotional shutdown. But Stoicism does not teach emotional numbness. It teaches discipline of energy. There is a crucial difference. Emotion is what you feel. Energy is what you invest. You can feel disappointment without chasing. You can feel hurt without explaining. You can feel confusion without seeking validation. Withdrawing energy does not mean becoming hostile or intentionally distant. It means refusing to pour attention into a dynamic that no longer meets you with respect. This is where many people lose themselves. They try to fix silence with effort. They try to repair distance with availability. They try to earn presence by giving more. But energy given without reciprocity does not heal relationships. It reinforces imbalance. Stoicism asks a simple question instead. Is this interaction strengthening my character or weakening it? If engaging pulls you into anxiety, self-doubt, or self-abandonment, the answer is clear. So you stop investing, not with anger, not with resentment, but with calm restraint. You continue to act with integrity. You remain polite if interaction resumes. You don't burn bridges, but you no longer chase access. This shift is subtle, yet powerful. When energy is withdrawn, manipulation loses momentum. When effort disappears, pressure tactics fail. When emotional labor ends, the dynamic is exposed. Some people react strongly. They may escalate. They may reappear suddenly. They may test again with indirect signals. Others fade quietly. Both reactions reveal the same truth. They were attached not to who you are, but to what you provided. Stoic philosophy does not mourn this loss. It accepts it, because what leaves when energy is withdrawn was never sustained by respect. This is why the Stoic response is not to harden the heart, but to guard it. You keep your emotions human, but your energy becomes selective. You no longer invest where presence is conditional. You no longer negotiate your worth through effort. You no longer try to be understood by those who chose distance. Withdrawing energy restores balance. It returns your attention to what you can control, your values, your actions, your inner stability. And something unexpected happens when you do this. You stop feeling ignored, not because others changed, but because your sense of self is no longer tied to their response. In the next part, you'll see why being ignored is sometimes not a loss at all, but a quiet sign that you've outgrown the role you were once expected to play. 6. When being ignored is a promotion. At first, being ignored feels like a demotion, as if you were pushed aside, as if your place was quietly taken away. But in many cases, it's the opposite. You weren't removed because you became less valuable. You were removed because you became less manageable. In certain dynamics, your role was never equal. You were the one who adjusted, absorbed tension, made things easier for others. That role comes with access, but it also comes with limitation. The moment you stop performing it, the system no longer knows where to place you. So it excludes you, not out of hatred, but out of confusion. You no longer fit the expectations that once defined your usefulness. This is why growth often creates distance. When you develop boundaries, clarity, and emotional independence, you stop offering what some people relied on: your compliance, your availability, your predictability. When those disappear, access is revoked. From a Stoic perspective, this is not punishment, it is reclassification. You are no longer seen as a resource to be managed. You are seen as autonomous. Autonomy disrupts hierarchies built on emotional leverage. So, the dynamic adjusts by creating space. Ignoring becomes a way to avoid renegotiation. Here is the crucial shift. What you lost was not connection, it was positioning. You are no longer placed beneath expectations. You are no longer easily influenced. You are no longer reactive. That is not rejection, that is elevation. Not everyone knows how to relate to someone who does not chase approval. Not everyone is comfortable engaging without control. So instead of meeting you on equal ground, they step away. Stoicism teaches that not all distance is a loss. Some distance is a filter. It separates those who valued your presence from those who depended on your compliance. Being ignored often marks the end of an old role, the role of mediator, the role of emotional regulator, the role of constant responder. And while losing a role can feel unsettling, it creates space for something more stable. Respect, the kind that does not require explanation, the kind that does not demand performance, the kind that does not vanish when you stop trying. If someone cannot stay connected without control, their absence is not failure, it is alignment. In the final part, you'll learn how a Stoic responds once this clarity arrives, not by fixing the silence, but by ending the game entirely. 7. The Stoic response that ends the game. Once you see the pattern clearly, the question is no longer why you're being ignored. It becomes how you choose to respond. The Stoic response is not dramatic. It does not seek closure through confrontation. It does not demand acknowledgement. It ends the game by refusing to play it. The first step is observation. You notice the silence without labeling it as disrespect or rejection. You see it as information. Someone has changed how they engage with you. That change tells you something about the structure of the relationship. Nothing more needs to be added. The second step is acceptance. Acceptance does not mean approval. It means you stop resisting reality. You stop asking questions that have no honest answers. You stop replaying conversations. You stop filling gaps with self-blame. You accept that access has been withdrawn and you do not chase it back. The third step is forward movement, not revenge, not withdrawal out of spite. Movement toward your own life. You redirect attention to your work, your discipline, your growth. You invest where energy is returned, not tested. This shift quietly changes everything because the dynamic only exists as long as you are reacting to it. When you stop checking for messages, stop rereading silence, stop waiting for signals, the power evaporates. Stoicism teaches that dignity is not defended, it is maintained. You don't announce boundaries, you live them. You don't demand respect, you behave in ways that no longer bargain for it. This is why the Stoic response feels anticlimactic to outsiders. There is no final message, no emotional speech, no dramatic exit. There is simply non-engagement with what weakens you. That non-engagement restores your center. You stop orienting your worth around someone else's attention. You stop measuring yourself by access granted or denied. Silence no longer creates urgency. Distance no longer defines value. You are no longer reacting to control. You are acting from clarity, and that is why this response ends the game. Not because the other person changes, but because the dynamic no longer has a place to operate. When control disappears, the need for explanation disappears with it. What remains is self-respect. And self-respect does not need acknowledgement to exist. Silence after clarity is where most people struggle. They understand the idea intellectually, but emotionally they hesitate. They wait. They wonder if they should say something. They fear appearing cold, rude, or dismissive. But Stoicism is not about appearances, it is about alignment. When you have already observed the pattern, accepted the reality, and chosen to move forward, adding words does not bring peace, it brings noise. The urge to explain usually comes from two places: hope for validation or fear of misunderstanding. Both place your inner state back in someone else's hands. A Stoic does not try to control how they are perceived. They focus on governing their conduct. If someone misunderstands you after you've acted with integrity, that misunderstanding is outside your domain. Trying to correct it pulls you back into negotiation. This is why restraint is not passive, it is deliberate. You're not waiting for things to improve. You're choosing not to participate in dynamics that require self-abandonment. Over time, this choice reshapes your emotional landscape. You stop scanning for signals. You stop interpreting delays. You stop assigning meaning to absence. Not because you are numb, but because your attention has returned home. What once felt like being ignored now feels neutral, sometimes even relieving. You no longer need to manage impressions, moods, or expectations that were never mutual. This is the quiet power Stoicism offers. It does not promise that people will come back. It promises that their absence will no longer disturb your center. Paradoxically, this is when respect often reappears, not always from the same people, not always in the same form, but from those who recognize steadiness without performance. They sense that you are no longer available for emotional bargaining, that access to you requires sincerity, not pressure. And if no one returns, then you have lost nothing essential. You have simply cleared space. Space for relationships that do not rely on control. Space for conversations that do not require defense. Space for a self that is no longer constantly adjusting. Stoicism does not ask you to isolate yourself. It asks you to choose your connections consciously. Being ignored taught you something valuable, not about them, but about where you once gave too much. You don't need to announce that lesson. You live it with fewer words, steadier actions, and a calm that does not seek approval. That is how the Stoic response completes itself. Not with closure from others, but with clarity within. Being ignored often pulls the mind into panic. It makes you question your worth, replay conversations, and search for mistakes that may not exist. But through a Stoic lens, silence is not an accusation, it is information. What you experienced was not rejection in the way most people understand it. It was a power shift, a moment where control quietly disappeared and the dynamic revealed its structure. Some people remain connected only when access is easy, emotions are available on demand, and boundaries stay flexible. When those conditions change, distance appears, not because you became less, but because you became less manageable. Stoicism teaches that your peace cannot depend on someone else's attention. The moment your stability is tied to being noticed, you hand your center away. Reclaiming it does not require confrontation, explanation, or emotional performance. It requires restraint. Restraint from chasing clarity, restraint from defending yourself to those who withdrew first, restraint from measuring your value by who responds and who doesn't. This restraint is not weakness, it is discipline, and discipline turns silence from a threat into a filter. Those who respected you will adjust, those who relied on your compliance will fade. Both outcomes serve the same purpose: alignment. You are not here to be accessible to everyone. You are here to live in accordance with your values. If being ignored followed your growth, let it stand as confirmation. You stepped out of a role that required self-abandonment. You chose clarity over comfort, and that choice changes everything. Not because the world responds differently, but because you do. When your self-respect no longer negotiates with silence, nothing essential can be taken from you.